ni tak lampa na ve kuna ZSN Study Circle khat ve ki mo thei no nai yama ki pa wa ya mi tuna mi som lenga hiam itel thei wa tu le na kamuda na 15 participants hi wa den chang in len lut be amwa le i admit jail di wa ma tuna parliament sai ta di wa ama sai na kan gen no pa hi le last month September kha bangyam boy nam jakina kula mapan rem chan lo nam jakina akini thei kya wai kha paisa ma ille tuna ma son thei jelina tuna nei thei dina yom non tawa akipa waya tomchik guest citizen speaker diu kha kon gen jek dia ama a hi le Tawnsuanlal Valte a hiya ama kha tulelina UOH University of Hyderabad sociology department PhD a hi lela a topic a hi ale a focus consider borderland studies and theme of governmentality hai banga hiya a focus ka wai to kiton mai na tunia le topic on tel hi dia ginta ka hiya tunia topic a hi le den chang le chang za semina tu gen tu pi pai na to nai na chang ta gen gen dia savaging the illegible ma and other questions against Zomia from Zo country chi banga hiya ai kha hun ways non se lo ina mabana abana e pai to diwa den chang in le question hun na ki hong dia wai di le ina ki sakol diwa ma wai mai na tuna speaker di pau to na ama hun ipeta hi
ama sa penina akipa waya vanga grupa ukopin hon cham ni dan ma ain tek pa pen ki present sakchi dan de khong ka banga ka ki swang la ma sa pen na ki swang la thu kon gen hi hem la himale atang pi na en study circle ki chin hilele mi isap changa kha ta pe PhD zo sa te ki sam in ai ki le recognized speaker kwa hiam bang tan hiam achievement nei sa te professor te kong ki sam in chen amau thu gen dia ki sama hi ama wa te present dia himale yai pen kha pochdan de tele hi lwa dia hi kom koma one another aim of the Zomi Scholars Network Study Circle is to share working papers mo why ahi na kha a working papers present bang ma ki complete nai lo himale icha present ki discuss to the ina di platform ahi dile tupna khat to ahi waya ka ngai to le working papers a finished work lampanga kha ukhup bangin kha hong pat sa ka hi le he pen kha midang kom ha nget sangina nang ma mai na ong ki pan leng chi ki ma mai na ong ki pan masa leng chi dan de kalung sima a no ma waya ka working paper chi na yai ka thesis chapter khat chi di hinte chapter khat akim sip chu hilo himale chapter khat ka koi som khat a hiya wai kaun share kaun present dia topic a hi le savaging the illegible kachia and other questions against Zomia from Zo country hey kha akamala kha thupi lo bang ma le ho hiya savage ichi cha chu singtang mi te gen na hong hingal mai mo hilele singtang savage ichi cha nga le kha banga mi changkang lo te mi twal niam te gen na dani na ko ile hang hile illegible ichi cha bang china hiya ichi le legible ichi cha nga kha thil the siam hwai category ki chian nei gen na hiya eligible ichi cha chu category ki chian nei lo hi cha box khata conceptual box khata koi thei lo china hin chin hile chi le chu hei conceptual box khata category khata ahon ko lu thei lo changa savage hon chi u china hima inchin a why pen kha question mark a be sak ka hiya and other questions against Zomia chi a hiya from zo country perspective from zo country chi na hiya Zomia ichi banga ya chi telema ban ian dia abstract en le hang conventional historiography ichi cha history yet chang ina i to a iom na izogam chi zen ni Indo-Myanmar borderlands lakha at historically speaking frontier danina aki conceptualize sa why kha two nice that in 2009 lakhong 2002 lakhong ina Schendel te Scott te in kha hai area kha Zomia a hi chi kamal zang ina ahon khek no na mo hai Zomia chi kamal le Zomi chia pata la ko hi himale a Zomi not as an ethnic identity but as a concept metaphor hin chin bang again som nawa hi le nidanga frontier kichite pen kha banga savage primitive people chi kha ki gen in civilization atai sante ahia why kha Zomia cha hon khek cha kha civilization atai san hilowin chin i a tup monga civilization a ki hen lut lo china china lampanga hong hei sakwa hiya ken hei muna ka gen ka argue so ma hi le yai Zomia ichi tup monga civilization puwa om ichi hi ai ke le civilization atai san ichi hi ani tuak kha civilization ai ke le stateness ichi waya pata kha apolamda na hong ki koi ahia ani tuak ka mo hegemonic le counter hegemonic ichi hi dominant le counter dominant ichi hi waya kha ka question ahi le to question the legitimacy mo yai narrative chi dia highlanders are stateless chi narrative I assumption pen kha bang chi tukin a legitimate chi pen question as ut ka hiya why question koma kha yai ihon question changa are there alternate ways of understanding pre and early colonial highland polities mo and what are its implications on understanding the Indo-Myanmar borderlands chi hiya yai kha ka abstract da na hiya I hichi da ni na kon pai pi da section bangza hiam in kabola I wedi na a next slide a hong lut pi hen la a next slide en le hang introduction da na en le to question the historical legitimacy of the assumption that Southeast Asia highland dwellers are stateless ahia mo why kha ken ka argue so ma hi le highlands are not banga hai mana highlands as sites of uniform state negativity chi a hi mo lekin kha hai kha uniform lo wa hi chi a hi uniform lo hi chin we have variable supralocal ichi cha chu khokhata ki localize lo azo I sisana ki kui zop pi teng cho om khom chi dia khotom tam pang khoma hi ta kwa le sisana ki kui zop pi teng ma chi mai ni be khat teng ma hi ke le hung khat teng ma chi hi lo wa wai ba na le political organization ana oma hi chi kha argue som ka hi ya wai kha e ta le yai kha iong et changa a third point a ta le yai narrative chi dia highland dwellers are stateless chi narrative or uncivilized chi narrative pen kha it is a product of mutual illegibility mod illegibility chi cha dena category khat sunga ki ko ilut theilo na pen a language na dai lo na analytical banga terminology in adai lo na why illegibility aom zia ka kha banga bangzia ka omai chile distinct symbolic system ki banglo no iom zia ka hi chi kha hi ya next slide en le hang igam next slide hei igam gen som kha to hei muna me pa John Michot kichi in article khat agel na Zomia plus chi aman ka William Van Schendel le James Scott in Zomia again te to aman Highland region Himalaya region abe la pa Zomia plus achi ahia waya ame pa kilang ke male Afghanistan laka mualtum mi te pana Vietnam tana khamtung gam teng mualtung gam teng banga contiguous cultural region chidanina a present na mo yai pen kha just for our our pictorial understanding it's here a spatial understanding mo danina yai limlak kon la ahia a next slide by le ahile a question must up in pen chimaini the first section ahile are highlanders stateless or do highlands or frontiers kill states chi question ahia mo ahile hay muna kha ei mama ina ikitot dikha history pre-colonial history pen kha ithei utchang ina our main source of information banga ya chi ye ta lekha colonial writings te ahiya mo our major source of information about the pre-colonial past comes from the writings of colonial officer come ethnographers mo and their diaries and official correspondences. For example, Pemberton, Carey and Tuck, Shakespeare, T.H. Lewin, William Shaw, ichi teka, colonial officer Luing and Hyunjin, Koyam Manipur, Hiam, Chittagong Hill Tracks, Hiam, Lusai Hill, Siam, Chin Hill, Siam, Koyam, Koyam, Maja, officer Ana Pang, Koma, Nasep, Koma, Ka, Singtang, Mite, Amu Danu, Kamtung Mite, Anamu Danu, Icha, Adis, Anagel, Zelu Ahia, Mo, Eka, ama sa pen radical luate da na colonial writing teng te kha zuawa hi chi gen ut aki hi ke ya we must commend these colonial officers for the zeal of gathering information and documenting what can sometimes almost be called thick description of our ways of life mo hima le equation diu poi mo ma ma hi le hiai documentary writing agbol te descriptive writing abol te un kha bang purpose serve ahi a le bang narrative zui ahi a chi ahi a mo ya ya kha apoi mo ma ma ahi le hiai colonial writing ichi te kha i a narrative zui un kha colonial governance been justify na dia ki gel ahiwa mo Bernard Con in 1996 colonial forms of knowledge gel dan ahiya and they are often fed by a multiplicity of lowland informers mo instead of going to the highlanders themselves why kha Bianca son in making of the zoo 2013 a PhD thesis gel ahiya mo Waya ka hiai colonial writing te ka a descriptive value pen ka ning nyam tuan lo a narrative value le a analytical banga uh, complexity pen ka question ngai a hiya a hi le himale hiai muna ka a ki leave out kha banga hiya to Bianca son le Bernard Conte kongin ka colonial writing te ka question tawi chu himale a critique kom wa ka a question khak lo bang oma ichi le kha frontier kichi concept pen hong hi chin hele frontier ichi pen banga ya ichi cha e mol tung gam ten kha ya manipur le tripura le assam le burma ki ka la ka he banga kumpi gam om lo na te chini wai te kha empty space frontier dana hon ki muai chu ile frontier empty space ma ana ki hi ma hiam chi dot na ka dongut ka hi ma le frontier ichi pen bang chi na ya chi en masale hang Ledis Christoph in 1959 definition appear it symbolizes the margin of the inhabited world left behind by civilization or state. The frontier represents a source of danger in which the inhabitants are ignorant of civilized or state order of social life. And the frontier represents a different type of society of frontiersmen who are savages, barbarians, primitive people, tribes, and lawlessness, in contrast to the lawful social order that we find in states. The definition of frontier ahi. Next slide by there. Himalaya hay pen ka frontier mainstream definition, dominant definition ahiya. 21st century tanale azo tu tanale India, US, ichiya kovel pumpia gam teng teng kha frontier a treat danu kha hichi hi mo India in aimi te ahon treat dan chi dia tribe dan ahon treat in sin hoi kha amao definition of civilization khat oma it hitalo dan ahon muzia ko STA bangi cha hong piak dan oma hi mo hile yai pen kha a dominant narrative pen counter na di dana kha James Scott in 2009 The Art of Not Being Governed chi hong gelin chin hwaya kha Zomia concept pen William Van Schendel in 2003 a tu hiam three hiam a gel sa pen kha reframe thakin chin aman kha Zomia ichi frontier ichi te kha they are not primitive out of ignorance of the state mo out of ignorance of civilization chi civilization ichi atai san hilowa atup monga a political choice civilization pua a omu a hi chi argue in chin why kha bangzia ka ichile to avoid taxes mo state a iom le tax piak ngai state a iom le corvee labor forced labor state a iom le gal honom galom changa banga destruction lian piam suk ki suksian na aliam le bai na tampi lian pi mass scale a honom mo azo army khatin gam khat ado di changa alampia atop namun pe uma kha destruction in zuye chu hoi jaka it leaves behind a trail of destruction hi le hi teng state a om ja ka hi teng om changa kha min kha state a om lo tel zo a hi ti argue hong hi time chin hoi kha state a om long te nu chin kham tunga ma hong mu mol tunga ma hoi mol tunga ma hon om chiangwa kha state a pata protection kha hong nga tau bang chi danai chi le friction of terrain achia scottin hoi kha friction of terrain chi changa tu highland te kha lampi phok lua lampi omlo banga gammang sa lo ma mo hoi gammang ahon sa luat chianga kha state kha hoi lampanga kamtung gama hong penetrate to thelo in chin banga statist movement state represent movement te chi mai ni big armies ichi ya royal carriages ichi ya ai kele regulated or taxed trade and commerce trade and commerce to om khamai the himal regulated hit helo regulate bun lo mo why friction of terrain ya ka hiya hile hi friction of terrain a survive na dia kha hi zomia people ten kha state evasive practices like zooming to us in lama tu tana le I practice zooming cultivation le multi cropping ki follow a hi chi kha ama argument hong hita mo multi cropping chi chianga I bu chou bol hia mai ke le me chi khat chou hi sa nga me chi ne banga plan chi tuam hi in wai te kha khata sia le khat hi the khata sia le khat hi the cha kha source som te wai te kha atam zo kha text in state in le a text di chang kha I standardized haksa sa azia kha achi tam lo state a dia kha all sam kha chi khat hi di alompia hi din wai kha text di himalet to hi cha kham tung gam yong om chi tuam tom yon hi changa kha textbook lo chi dana hoi in kha state a pata protection pia chi dani na argue he kha azomia argument hi next slide pai le hang e he kha James Scott in argument hi mo a counter hegemonic argument hi himal the question now is how truly applicable is zomia mo chi kha question dong ut I ta heka 2009 na James Scott in agel kit phet in 2010 na Journal of Global History special Zomia edition chi oma hwaya kha article sagi gya thiam a oma John Michaud chi te Sarah Schneiderman ichi te mi to min kha Zomia kha hon critique ko chu a critique na ole tam pion populist argument populist ahi kele idealist romantic ahi kele anarchic ideology James Scott kha a intellectual leaning kha anarchism lampang hiya communism anarchism pen kha ideology pen kha ya khamtung gam mi teng kha appropriate hi chi khong moi cha argument tampi hon om hiya hima ale question khat kha dot khak lo om le is Zomia truly stateless chi kha ahonoma mo yai don na kha yele pi waters ki chi nagate tungtanga lai agel hoi ma khatina 2012 article agel na highland polities te kha stateless hitwan kher lowin secondary or mimic states ahiu achia mo mimic states ichi changa highland polity highland na khamtunga mi te kha amawa state khat ki bulphu na di khopa kha hard zo lo a resources nei lo hima le lowland state omte practices te chi mai ni a ritual tom te a kichei dan te hwai te copy unchin ahon copy u chang kha state dan de ki project ko hile state dan de power le stability nei lo chi a hiya why example dina ahom te le hill tribe te relationship te bang again na mo why kha he ti he kha avelia state pen buk ngei ngei le highland state pen kha om thei lo di chi na hiya parasitic state ichi dan de na a conceptualize mo himale hunong pai to zela let better le sastra one in 2023 kumina article a gelna highlands not as state negatives mo but rather as sites of creative transformation chi idea kha ahon flow ta why idea afloat kit nungina intellectual advancement in Zomia in the understanding of Zomia kha ahon ki hek non a hiya mo why kha aban next slide ta enb wa taking cue from the subsequent critiques of Zomia mo strands ni chimai ni strand of thought ni ngai apai na ma khat a hi le re-questioning the historical understanding of state mo state ichi a definition le ithei siam dan pen kha question thak nga ya hi chi kha ma hoya kha informative ma hi le two modern state hila traditional state te tung tanga hi mo sj tambia in 1973 anagel 2013 na aki publish thak non galactic polities chi awma waya kha traditional Southeast Asian state te Malaysia te Burma te Manipur te Ahom te wai te kha galactic states ahiwa totalistic in nature ahiwa totalizing hilo totalistic in nature ahiwa mo wai bangchi na ichi chianga the center of power in a state represented the total character of that particular polity mo wai kha ette nadina Manipur bang enle hang mei te leng ten kha i rong mei te gal gal basimu khong sai how kip ichi hia khosunga accommodate ai kile pangal te accommodate ai kile tangkhul te ukhul khong gal basimu wai amau tunga ukna nei wa hi mo vai hom na ni hi chi alat sak na wa kha agam sungwa a copy sunga a capital wa kha symbolically spatially space pe chin vai kha amau me ti ritual za le kha I accommodate mot hoi ja ka me te ritual a bang chu naga bi taka rong me te le tangkhul te bang kha dominant ma chi da akilang ma a hi wa hai kha this is a part of what makes galactic polities a hi mo wa kha functionalism ichi cha power kha a center a pata apola ma hi cha ki extend khia in chin fixed boundary nei the ngi lo mo a center a power alen tu pen a hat cha kha ho ya aki extend na za khon pung in chin a center a power pen a hat lo cha nga hi cha hon kiam zel hoi kha hoi a center a power pen in a vai hom na asuk let cha nga kha subsidiary state or principality te kha a loyalty hon pia u mo himalaya loyalty te kha all sam taka khang khat le dai ham adai le dai ham khonga kha a centera ompian ahong hat lo chianga kha midang kyanga chimai ni midang kyanga loyalty pethe a hi ke le amau ma le hat ahong ki sakwale amau ma le sovereign ka hiu kwa ma dang nuaya omlo ka hiu ko ma khen ka ding riu cha khau cha kha claim the gi ge hi chi dana kha state ichi a nature of state ichi ma le kha via Westphalian understanding of state ichi to ki ma in I fluid ma ahia mo next slide en le hang yai pin kha mandala model of statecraft kichi ahia this is in contrast to the Westphalian or a feudal concept of statehood mo in which there is a fluidity of statecraft and stateness which is not unlike highland socio-political entities kachi yai highland gam tung gam mi ten iki vai hom dan to ki gam la lom lo wa hi chi kha hi mo hi le hai to again tenga pata kha conceptual frame ni integrate the om ta hai ama sa pe na hi le highlands as sites of creative transformation not limited by ecological essentialism or ideological anarchism mo ecological essentialism ichi le banga civilization atai san mi te chi gen na hi ideological anarchism ichi le tu monga civilization tai san te chi na hi highland hille highland ichi te kha agam kha it is beyond both of these mo it is beyond this dominant and counter dominant narratives ahia ani na hile state ichi kha mandala model ina en hile hang a state concept him le kha a fluid dan le a stable lo dan kha hong kilang zo sema power a function dan tuam khatina mu theina oma hetigel kha gom khom le hang e banga zogama a banga political entity omte bangchina I thei I en thak thei diwa chi kha a et thei a hi mo heidina etta ette na dina a next slide a en le hang tuna banga zo country a kachia we can conceptualize the highlands against the dominant grain into various supralocal organizations more that are both contextual and diverse more James Scott in ka grand theory types and grand narrative ta na hong kini chu himale grand narrative te shortcoming hon kilat na ka hiya ya oma hiya again te adik tampi om male contextual takathil ihon et chianga empirical criticality to ihon et chianga kha I a variation tampi oma hiya mo hoi te kha enle hang a sung ma professor zangkhongam dongyen te khongin kha agel sekteu hoi te pata iet chiang ina traditional anthropologically traditional or tribal society to frame a fit thei di pol omin chin azo a hoi frame a fit lo pol omi chu hoi traditional frame a fit lo pol te iet le silo various sectional silo confederacies te kachia northern silo te southern silo te eastern silo te western silo te hei te kha I single village republic hilo wei chu amao kha apangkhom pol omun apoi mo changa ja ki khai khom then apoi mo changa kit ki the da the je lu mo huji a hiya pailo ani na et the ma kha kam hau sukte dietic dual ukpi ka chia hei te kha kam hau le khan thuam kha mual be ma o ma kam hau kha te di ma o ma then ja case study dan na hei te a thuk zoi na konet pi dia pa khit chiang ina Falam Council of Confederate Warlords chi o ma hei Falam Council te a hi le I overlord tampi overlord nga hiam ki gom khoma kha Falama kha council khat bol khoma hi wa amao own subsidiary village nei veku khosom gu khong himale amao overlord teng kha council khata pang khomu wa kha Falam council a hiya mo ete kha alternate state himaya hiya why lo wa le traditional or anthropologically fitting frame or ma why te le independent single village republic ichi te pol bang omve ve tho ki hi mo ki ma hi himale mi teng hilo azo to ma hi ale lam pang taka single village republic ichi khodang ko ma to ki sai lo independent taka village republic a om ichi kha a hi dan taka a real empirical real te ndi hi le hang to ma da ya hi azo aning che ka common zo deu kha closely tied kin related villages or chiefs hai te kha unawa upa pen in kha ain pi pen loin chin akim le kyanga sangam pasal sagi banga nei le amao kha mani khwa chan nei un chin khwai ten kha yai in pipa kyanga banga allegiance pya mo khwai kha closely tied kin related villages or chiefs china ka koi yai le kha traditional or traditional anthropological frame kita ahia himale non traditional frame kha example thum tak bang silo te sanga le kam house te le Falam council te bang chu traditional het lo hi himale khamtung gam mi te ki vai puak dan khat a hiya ya kha case study dani na endi hile hang tuna valley state te ichi di mo Burma te ichi hia Malaysia te ichi hia Angkor Wat te ichi hia Thailand Ayutthaya ichi hia hei te kha valley state dani na ian na mo Assam te ahom te bang chia valley state te kha stable ma dana kimu section pin tambia te khongai ke le Southeast Asian scholar tak ten ahon sui chiang wa stable het low fluid ma fluid mo a power kha generation khang aki khek tenga a power kha I cha ki khek gi a hi why kha why concept chi mai ni why concept to kha case study khat yen diwa mo he muna asaum lo ma a I kon sim kha tho diwa hon ngai sak non ngai sak diwa narrative khat hong ge nu cha hi cha counter narrative dana mo alternate narrative dana sapa wa hi sapa kon sim dia. Let us take one particular example for a more contextual and nuanced critique of Zomia and the notion of frontier, with which we see the past of this present borderland, informed mainly by a reading of Tributary Hill Polity written by T. Ginkhantang and Pauni Khai Swantak in 2015. It is a genealogy of the Kamhau Sukte. The Kamhau Sukte are considered to be one of the greatest, though not oldest, line of rulers in Zhou country. Their rise to prominence began with the assassination attempt by the Mangkwa, 9 chiefs on Khantuam, a resident of Molbim, who ran away to Ralang village under Chief Kwangcheu Zahao around 1800. Chief Kwangcheu at the time was part of a confederate council of chiefs known as the Falam Council, consisting of various Zanyat, Laisun, and Zahao chiefs, with the seat of power in Falam. All these clans with slightly differing dialects claim a shared genealogy, but no longer bound by any immediate kin relations. But not bound by any immediate kin relations. Each of them also had their own waxing waning realms with several subsidiary tribute paying villages that confederated together at Falam. Kantrom and his eldest son Kamhau have been recorded as having fought for Falam Council against particular clans that defied the council or threats against it, having earned the respect of the council. After his eldest son Kamhau had grown up, they requested the council for aid to attack Molbeim and claim chieftainship there. Despite persuasion, even offers of membership to the Falam Council, Kantrom insisted on going back home, thus beginning the rise of the Sukte polity or principality. Over the span of a few decades in the 1820s and 1830s, he and Kamhau captured and established their rule over much of what is now northern Chin state, over disparate clans like the Manlun, Thado, Guite, etc. There were certain strands within each of these clans that refused being ruled by the Sukte and migrated beyond the reach of, of their immediate tributary relations with the center at Tedim. But among those that remained, they were made to occupy various positions within the Ukpi Council. Although the Sukte did practice marriage alliance with various clans like the Guite and Manlun, the entire principality was no longer tied by kin relations, but rather by that of a cascaded form of political loyalty that extended the tual spiritual bond in the village level to that of the whole network of villages symbolized by the authority of Kantram at Molbeim and Kamhau, who established its capital at Tedim, a village that he finally consolidated after as much as 3 attempts made over a few decades more. This principality, which had begun as a subsidiary of the Falam Council due to Kantram's allegiance to Falam, did not, however, extend to Kamhau. Kamhau, on the other hand, paid tribute to Kantram's youngest son because the Sukte followed ultimogeniture. More, the youngest carried the genealogy of the clan, who ruled in Molbim as per Sukte customs, that is, immediate kin relations. However, whatever expansion of the realm that followed the Sukte line was done by Kamhau and his son Khochin, who expanded the Sukte realm to cover as much as 150 villages by the time of the British advent in the 1890s. While Kamhau paid customary tribute to Khantuam at Molbim, and Kantram paid subsidiary tribute to Falamo, distinguish between customary tribute and subsidiary tribute. Kamhau himself was not liable to pay tribute to Falam while exacting subsidiary tribute as sovereign from all other villages and chiefs that came under his protection. This is a form of dyadic or dual nature of the Kamhau Sukte polity, which emanated elements of what is popularly known in Southeast Asia as the mandala model of the state or a galactic polity. The expansion of Kamhausukte polity brought it to conflicts and interactions with not just other highland polities like the Silo, as well as conflicts with subsidiary chiefs under the Falam Council. More, especially Kamhau, not Kantram, but Kamhau had conflicts with other chiefs in under the Falam Council. but also with valley states like the Shan principalities in Jinwin Basin, as well as the Manipuri kingdom to the north, with whom they exchanged territorial waxing waning phenomena and fought over tribute collection of villages in between Manipur kingdom and Tedim principality. Of particular note, certain cases or examples can be taken. For example, the siege of Tedim, which was made by the Meitei King Chandrakirti in 1856, in which 1,500 soldiers, according to Meitei in colonial records, and 2,000 soldiers by Tedim records, uh, were defeated by the Kamhau Sukte, who mustered warriors from all other subsidiary villages, as well as from allies like the Sizin or Sizang. Sizang, it's it here, pushing their realm as far down to Chakpi Karong River in present-day Chandel. Another instance can be referred to the sending of Kai Khwal as an emissary by the Kamhau Sukte overlord or Ukpi to the Manipuri court when Chief Gokhothang was captured and imprisoned in Imphal jail in 1871. Another instance, for example, which is markedly significant, was when colonial officers Kerry and Tak and the political agent of Manipur recorded that they had given a certain amount of villages that were subsidiary to the Kamhau Sukte and gifted it to the Meitei king by granting it, by putting it within the territory of the Meitei king as a means of garnering the favor of the Meiteis. In when the Manipur Chin Hills boundary was being made in 1896, if I'm not mistaken about the year. Tua hian narrative iat le kha ngai to na thil tha khong po thei tampi o ma hi tuna next slide ipai diwa. If we look at the next slide, I hope the table is clear enough. Yeah, then our narrative iat pen kha ingai khal pen kha en thak le hang. One may ask the question then, we have listened to a narrative of the Kamhau Sukte as a case study. We can ask this particular question then. Despite the mandala type nature and affinity to the waxing waning power equations that mark traditional Southeast Asian polities, did these polities in the highlands still qualify as states? Why it would be informative to look at this particular tabulation. Dominant public Scottian James Scottian counter dominant counter dominant paradigm katsia. Tabulation valley civilization danin amuwa highland friction of terrain here savage dania kimwa valley attacks oma highland attacks kia valley paid armies oma highland no paid or regular armies here valley bureaucratic record keeping oma highland bureaucratic record keeping omlo hi valley a definite royalty oma hi fixed sisana ajinulji kisud Tupima mata kiswe highland omzolo dania kigena Velia sedentary agriculture mo tuilo kimi ahia himale highland sedentary agriculture kimi lo zo lo ki depend Velia corvee labor oma forced labor tina ahia highland corvee labor forced labor omlo Velia slave trade oma highland slave trade omlo dan na ki gena mo tagle exceptions to the rule dan le khatina oma heka the dominant and counter dominant paradigms da ina kon present mo himale he counter dominant paradigm te bana ai the yam til ai the yam chi kha dot twak a here in this table it can be seen that despite the extensive realms of highland polities they simply did not have the necessary elements to be considered states on their own right. Any resemblance to a state is reduced to what previous Zomian scholars have called parasitic or mimic states. Example yele water scontian haldana mo hima le. Next slide enle hang tuna. A more nuanced and contextual understanding can be seen from this tabulation. Mo hey tabulation pen enle hang ti tom khati naka ko ita valley taxes of cash and kind tax cash and kind akila highland tax lo himale tribute kila tribute kila tribute in the form of labor and produce of land or portions of game gansa ki machanga salyang ki pyak chi kong tribute kila hi Valley ka paid armies, dedicated barracks. Oma Himalaya Highland ka bachelor's dormitories ichi ka military institution ka tahi mo so min zolbuk ichi te ahia. Valley ka bureaucratic record keeping and written laws. Oma Himalaya Highland ka written laws ne ki male hang moral economy ki zuya hiya moral economy chi kha EP Thompson te khong in English society kong again nalia zat kha ka hiya mo moral economy a kha tual concept zuya kha I village aki rule hiya waya kha undefined principles mo of tlom ngai na and khan kho or khan kwa ichi kha ki zuya hiya hoi kha logic of collective well-being zui maya hi mo written law poi mo law village kha ki vai hom na oma hiya Valley aka sedentary agriculture kizuya hiya Highland aka slash and burn kizuya hi sedentary agriculture omvek ke himale mo himale hi pen kha Scott again dan male hiya midangin ten again dan male hiya ecological adaptation hiya mo it saves extensive labor for equal or more nutritional value hiya mo also Valley aka corvee labor oma hiya Highland aka communal labor kini hi thachial kini mo also house pa dia bang chu thapia kini hi wai kha labor kini hi wai dan mai na next slide ta en le hang valley kha slave trade oma hi slave trade le of two kinds kachia capture and sale of slaves prevalent for one is lifetime slavery or indentured labor or prostitution ikachia mo that is one form and another form ka slaves that had the ability to buy back their freedom ahia mo Waidan maina Highland leka slave trade omlo or slave trade om le exception to the rule akiche himale huchilo hi Highland leka slave trade omlo thama hi himale slave trade om pen kha a format ki banglo hi ya bang chidana ichi le swak le sal ichi kha oma swak le sal ichi changa slaves captured via raids of different villages or of the lowlands ahia mo and they were of further two types those who were later integrated into the village, they become part of the village. Mo, ahi kele, they were sold in exchange for guns or other ornaments with valleys. Ahia mo, adangka sikha chi ne ihia. Sikha ichi chianga murderers and lawbreakers or poverty-stricken individuals who sought refuge at the house of a chief by way of servitude. Mo, swak le sal le sikha ichi kha ne ki hei. Hei kha traditional definition chỉ để indigenous definition hi ton lo he ken kapya ka hi mo he a to ka argument framework banga to akita thei di da na hoi kon ko ya hi hi le to na next slide ta en le hang to hi argument tu ta na a paisa ta na I eta le I observe thei banga I chi le the highlands are not marked by a lack of social complexity mo they are not simply primitive or ignorant of state-ordered life. But a social complexity it is marked by a different symbolic system. Mo Edmund Leach in 1953 kachin te astadia gumsa gumlau te konga chi na ka symbolic system achi kamal ominchin hoi ama zat dan ban na kazang uda symbolic system achi kha I cultural system le I symbol le I ritual system kha I ecology to kitwa ka hon develop in hoi pen kha it is not prohibitive or negative of state-ordered life. Chỉ kha ka argument here. Mo, yeah, the distinctness of contextual and contiguous highland locations sharing particular symbolic systems allow allowed to accommodate varying levels of social complexity. Mo, yeah, and these highland states were administered and organized themselves in adaptation to the restraint of ecology. They were in constant, even symbiotic relationship with the valley states, but not necessarily subsidiary or parasitic to them. Mo, parasitic ker lo wahi ama highland ecosystem ma lekha ana bukim lo falam tele sukte te kito silo tele banga kwalngo te kito chila nakha ana bukim ma engine ama sung ma lekha symbolic system tuam ana nei wahi mo chi anatuam ananewa amausung mga mali supra local political organization also state it is necessarily essentially a supra local political organization that can act as sovereign a hi mo sovereign nei thamwa hi village chief te sovereign ana hi lo hi mo kerin takten kha the chiefs are the lord of the soil achiu kha dik chat lo na kha chief te kha individual village chief they are not the lords they have lords over them usually mo to whom they pay their tributes a hi mo wai jaka dik chat lo hi he kha colonial governance mechanism a narrative zatu china hi maya hi hei khong critical reading a i thei kha thei a hi mo tu na i colonial text example ni zangina i to ka argument pen kon banga sustain uta next slide ta enle hang ama sa penina th lewin in next slide ta th lewin in 1871 expedition na ama kha Chittagong Hill tracks kha DC na asep lai ta ka hiya mo waya kha aman kha southern column te British te southern column te zui a hiya waya British te southern column te aba zui ilaya kha our observation kha phaizang to akinai foothill area te chini phaizang to akinai ma te kha kholian ana omlowa hi him hoizia ka amao idea of the frontier lekha hi khonio chik lawless dana ngai to hi himale khamtung gam ava pai thuk de chiang wa kha i ya aki geldan ma bangina kholian le well ordered social structure hongmu to wa hi mo wai kha paradox khat amao internal paradox pen kha hong oma ya simle hang the whole silo country lay within striking distance of our position no less than 6 large villages being within a day's march mo zomia concept ya mai kile frontier concept zui tak de hile kholian ma injani za thum ya ka highlight dang khat pena in za thum om akichia mo injani za thum ten na khokhat ni khat sunga khia pai phak na a kha hwai pai phak na area sunga kholian guk tak aw ma le chu zomia argument na kha sustain zo lo de hi chu ecology na sustain zo lo de hi himale heimuna gel dana kha kholian ma injat ni za thum khong akitat na kha ni khat sunga khia wak pha ka kha i kita a hi mo why in kha a very complex social structure i en sak a hi beyond this achicha silo territory lay the how longs achi chu hwang ngo te here living on still loftier heights never trodden by English feet an undiscovered country range upon range stretching far away in the distance ma next it's in a ping number teleka gela ekha how I help govern India a fly on the wheel or how I help govern India pata hiya i Anoilama Enlehang. The next day, we moved forward and occupied the village of the Silo Chivanwaya, meeting with no opposition. This village was a large one consisting of about 300 houses and was remarkable for having uh, in its vicinity, a large sacrificial altar of curiously carved stone decked with a varied collection of the skulls of the different animals which had been offered thereon. I could find no human skulls among them. Mo, a last sentence. Headhunters chỉ có không chỉ hanga. Headhunting practice ichi ka. Colonial creation and a in colonial creation pen a narrative is a thing that in a practice I khadiam chi dot na another question hong piang his wa here ma tu na example dang khat kazang hota a next page a last slide en le hang hi kha falam kho a hi e Carrion takin the Chin Hills volume 1 agela hi falam kho kha 1890 1889 1890 Chin Lushai expedition pena hi ma ama pen kha Lushai expedition 1871 hi to pen kha Chin Lushai expedition 1889 1890 a hi ya kha falam kho atunwa alim la ko hi na zoom thei wale phone hiya me ke laptop hiya me en na hi wale na zoom thei diwa mai cha zoom leo chin yai kha in zanga bek phangna achiwa mo in zanga bek phangna a hi ya zomia argument da na kha kholian hichilom loma kholian kha highlandin kha ai accommodate zo lo de hi himalaya kha colonial ten british ten vai hon hom khum ma u a hi ya mo british ten vai hon hom khum ma u a hi ya hwa ya kha i falam khwa mai le alim lak ve lama pen le takla pen kha akizom di da na hi ya the left and the right side khai cha ki zom hi mo amwal te le akwa ki zom phe hi limlak ni dan no ma ken khatin ka gom thi ton ke chin ka koya wai kha I in kholian ma hi self sustaining hong hi Zomia argument hai ke frontier argument dana kha I kho khat kha kum som ni wa kha mun khata om thei lo win chin I a slash and burn na di chi mai ni gam abe cha kha khwa pen to akhopum bia pem hiaun chin a gambol thak ze lo hi mo lo bol thak ze lo chi a hi ma le hi falam khwa iet le kha I tua za hau te le tlai sun te I history kasim khang na tan ko nga bang iet ta le kha falam khwa kha I 1700 kum ma pata om sa hi ta hi mo a khwa tua he mun a khwa a swan het ke diu chi zo chingam khang hi ma le a ki swan ta ko le ni ve ni ve khong khat ve ni ve khong kan ki swan lo de hi chi na hi chi lom lo ma concentrated population a sustain na dia mo hi le he pianin kha a state ordered life a hi mo he ordered life le state ordered social organization authority om the namun gen na lat sak na a hi he in kha zomia ichi ekele highland ichi kham tungam mol tungam ichi te kha et dan thak in hon en saka mo he akhit na dina hi china kon gen dia sapang man kon sim non mai dia. This brings us to the question that is asked in the title of the presentation. The entire presentation. First na pin na question pin hondong sakta kahiya. Savaging the illegible question ka tot pin ka. It was not the lack of social complexity that made the inhabitants of the highland frontiers getting tagged as savages or barbarians or tribes, but rather that the form of social complexity was of a kind that was not associated with existing definitions and analytical frames available to colonial ethnographer cum officers who wrote about these people. What we see, therefore, is the extensive documentation of customary practices and tribal rituals, but a reduction of traditional polities into the framework of immediate kin relations, which fits the anthropological frameworks of that time more and remained unchanged until very recently. Uh, a notion that is associated with the prevailing definitions of what constituted a tribe. The social complexity and supralocal organization of highland polities were simply not legible to the existing categories or understanding of civilization and stateness. What we see, therefore, is a savaging of what was illegible to the colonial sovereigns, uh, to what they considered was the standard of civilization. Uh, and they were the ones who ushered in modernity, their own form of modernity, with the turn of the 19th century to the 20th century. 1800s up and 1900s ayong turn chaka amao hoy amao conceptual framework ane u to kizoi to na kha e hon frame chin hon gelu a hoi pen kha en kha chief te khong lor da soi da ki pom mo hita mo a hoi kha e implication to hai argument in kha implication tam pi nei the hi ya a hoi kha ngai to na a chi mai ni e a zo society chi ya ngai to na a kha e tam pi chim tak hon bol the a hi chi kha nga hai presentation again tuk na hi hichina kon khim di ka presentation ki pa ke
bảo hỏi mà mấy đó nè thì anh nói lo interesting biển mai à thì thị kháng nghe lộ tấm bia cái thị bia mà thì mi đăng tên leo chỉ đến na cái ta thôi interesting sama mà đi wa thì tu na thì hun ni hong đi wa mà question hun ai cái lẽ commendable loot bằng ông khác dân dân lẽ commendable thì na hun ni hong đi wa thì việc kun chu thì khát về thui na unmute ke diwa mo khat khatina aban banina question dong uthiam comment dong uthiam comment gen uthiam yo male e ki thei sakina hi china question r danina un I hong di wale. อืม comment bolu chi bangyom zen zen wale le ma bol the ye yom khaw ya
Edi ken kon gen cheu chilen kon comment music diam saulo
ole hi tham
e kon join zok thi kia ye sorry kon chile masapenina buai khajek ma kha in chen abula ki pan ngai khalo hi le kon ketchup na ka ketchup na khat omen chen ka ketchup khat omen chen wai pian kha wai e raja go khathang amatu wai pian kha to naina again hoi thowa hi le la wai a capture wa bang khan dalam penu guite history ke get lam kha hon gi kha chet ke ka comment nut neu kha mo wai pian kha mi te te na manun chin kon chu su pa le manun chin akigel dana kha i azel ta namuna le banga king treatment hi chia wai loyal banga royalty treatment pia ka hi won azo kha wai khathile atapa pa sum ka male ton wana
ha
eva vakha wana vatan khedi banga va hun khedi sida ne ko nga hoya ki justify dana ki kelin jin va hun khe thei ta tak ni din muna ding lo pi khat agui te history akha ahun khe thei di dan khata ge loi diam chi khong ka lung sim am na gen la ma chunan gen khom kha khol ki nai le kon gen kai to ko le chu hi tho mo ki ku le chu hong ni mai in chen wai pen hi wa khana boi na kha ata papa na hun khe thei di din muna ong in le hun khe thei lo hi zo ya banga hun khe u lo hun khe u chun khe u din hi le wai a hut khiak di kom ka pen kha ngui te history na hoi justify ma la atataka hu chi khol lo an hi diam chi hong ka lung sima ommo wai hi thank you adang
ka
te comment
respond
da di wai ting
ka respond ngal di mo wait
hi an respond ngal le te wa
ke thi na ta na mo gui te khang thu kha alai bua chu nei nga hi le ke confession hi dia kasim hoi tak tak zo nai ki ya himale ke thi na ta na kha go kho thang te kha to i banga chothe mun pi mo hoya i Bishnupur district omlen Bishnupur district hin ka the hel ke le chothe mun pi apa na ta naw te pi khia a kha i bangkhat lam akholamwa mual bangai mual nuam hele ilo sorry mual pi
mol pi
mual pi lama kha pi didana kisa hiya hoi kha a context kha thinga hiya lushai expedition dia akisak san laiwa british te akisak san laiwa kha kho hun hoi lo wa hi chi dana kha e atanaw te mo chothe mun pia pata pi khia a hoi muna gamna pia mi te kyang la ka wa om ki un la he banga mi te om na chi mai ni anai zo a save zo di muna kha pi som dan de we chu hoi kha a pi lai ta ka kha be yang muna chi kha muna kha to me te kha auxiliary force dana british ten ana post kha hoi muna hong ki mai to kha ya hu cha kha kema omin mata omin jel ham tang kha mo hoi kha ke thi dana chi ni adik ke mai the hi ma le ke thi dana kha go kho thang to sum kam kha mata om kho ma the nga mo go kho thang to sum kam kha mata om kho min hoi kha i à, cảm hào tên hong thei chiang wa cảm hào to pa kho chin sangam te la ka khat kha azi kha gui te te chu wain kha anget chiang a ka gui te pi te hi chi om wa hi hon tat khet pi na chi cha kha cảm hào in kha i kai khwal solin chin me te leng pa kya ba pa chin treaty of bangi treaty of sanjen thong pen hong gelun chin banga kichiam na hong bolumo i poster ai mu pen wai wai kha hon bolo kha waya kha go khutang simanta hi go khutang siman lo hi le go khutang le tat kha ta om din himale sum kam cho hong pot tai chu wai sum kam pen ama cho hong pot chang kha apa si na pen hi loin chin vengeance la ku mo waya kha aman kha wado thak thak e chu wai pen kha
wai
akhon
la
ma
kon nim tala visual diam to on
wai
music
ki thi da na hi atik lo mai thi hi
cái lệ
chini
chú thì là bài toán rồi lệ thì dấu biển kỳ lỗi mà hi lệ à vậy azel ta nó khác cùng khác 1871 72 khác Chin Lusai expedition biển mà first lo biển second biển mà này ama khác zela cùng ni ông man lo ya cùng khác theo chỉ
first
đàn được
pen
không
hi
first biển mà
Lushai expedition chok ha chin Lushai pen hinai lo
okay
Lushai
first
expedition
in
chok
79 biển này 71 là cái part 81 biển khác second is sorry adik ve ai le ama zel kha kum khat le tang mang no ama mi ti te hi lo mi ti kha british te to na pang khom ta tang nge yon chin ke le zalam tenga attack sai ta ki sai kha sim kha sim nga mo mon tong ta ma a yang ala ele detail pe na ka thei ka china chi da a hoi zel wa tang in chin ata papa ko pe na inom gen to le ki le kong confuse ka sum kam dan ko nga chu ko ngai pa ya mo ti ben ja ka kon comment chi lo a wai kha คุณมีเคสที่แต่ตักลิดานะอมวยาอมโลยาจีเปลี่ยนไอจุดตัวน้ำเย็นจากคนอินเตอร์รับใช่ไหมนี่คนคอมเมนต์กิ๊กเนาะคุณมีเคสที่
go
ดีดู
pan
นะ
hampe
ดิ
hun
แต่ตักลิดา
kedida
จี
na
เปลี่
ka
ยนไอ
kai
จุด
kwal aso lwe chu emissary da na
อ่า
aso lwe chu kam hau
อ่า
ten
อ่า
wai
ฮะ
dan de aso ma dan de hi
ไว้กลุ่มบางเรียวต่างมันนี่แต่หินกระดานอาลัมพิอมแต่ตักแค่
kum
ก็จะ
kha
จู
tang man
history
lo
and
di chi
justify
nai
ไหม
ve
ไหมไว้ที่จูand history
1871
and
na
justify
tang in chin 1872 hiya ma si da na ki thei ya mo
ไว้ที่
hi le chu kum khat atang man le tang man ham hi di chi nai ve
มันกระดาวจะดาวชิเลงอ่ะหอยกิปยาหอยโลกิเปเด็กจีดานเลยตัวนั้นเราเห็นเช่นอากุยเต history เกลตุเตียนค่ะ amau le amau nam pi ching nam lia na hi ichi pi lo na dan hi lo wen chen ana hi nge yun chen leadership e bang khong le amau makai na le ana hi vek man chen hi le a wai pen kha banga nop ta ka hun ke thei nge di dan de kha ta get in chen ma a gui te history pen kha wai pen chau hi ka kon argue chi di le dia ma argue le chui ka cha kon comment pen ma easy ta ka khu thiak thei di le ama hong si kha in a chi na dan de pen kha dam lo na sia kha nga chu ki gelin chen ata tak a hi le bang dia ka banga ai negotiation through kho nga khani khathum khaguk khasagi chi kho nga ki release ki kha khelo wa chi bang mo ngai bang ngai lam pang ye ai ten kon comment di thank you
ki pa ke thanks
Yang ki pawai ya abana midang om lai ya denina muan guite ke chin khut li khong dan kana mua question don of khong om kha ya le
Oh,
dot
eh,
te kha
avec cái telman kia, network hồi lúc kia cấp bakhalai ta kia, ya, loi history, history suit yang cái mi mal perspective ay colonial record so wa kibe sang mo. Maya beyond colonial record and ya archaeology ya ke bang banga ya, pau kichilo de banga ya, kamang hil, beyond colonial records and the pongin bang lebang kathi le bang chida to tang pi history bang le ke le bang tanem kana sima thu kha ki romanticization chi an de kha ki ha bola do chi bang e tekinan PhD bang hi le title ki men chenwai title to ke saya topic to ke saya evidence kai khomi chia chi bang ma ya te bang beyond colonial records banga history mabana hi thidan alam piom diam chi an deu khat azung kip deu nangin chini mo tulai bang nagati ya bang yel waya banga history and archaeology ki chewai pasal kharwai the lunglei so in to interview na khat kan na ngai khak le mau bang le history yai a pau pal hello bang ki chele yai ni danga wai te khong to cha connect mo azung kai kip sem thi nangin om thi diam chinan deu idea kon komen hi wai bangan ngai dano colonial records kong ka kham huai gop sasim chinan ve thil khat hi ge changa mi khat khat gel la wa ma hi ga la kai ama di kai en gen le la ma i de la ma ti kai mo chinan deu khatom in chin he zo hi disa ibang khat sa hi le yai bion in pai thil le history wa jung pi kip di om thi diam chi nangai dan kon kan ai chẳng ít
à cái khác i a chỉ tầm mấy lệ cái a sunga paradox mà cái nào sắc gì cái khác kam tung mi te chini a zo suan te tok lawa naga te tale kachin te tale ko ya i academic si to i politics su kha cha hi khen the lo hi cha khom gi ge hi ya mo wai ja ka i pau hel di ki ving ka ki chi kom mina i hi chi na kon chi dia i colonial records khan ning hwai a hi kom ma kha a colonial bias chi mai ni hwai i identify the a le kha i informative le descriptive hoi ma hi ya mo sap te hon gel na te kha hoi kha vanel sia the wal hi lo wa hi nei nel sia the wal hi lo wa hi huchia hi kom ma kha e sunga igel te I oral history te akigel khia chianga kha for example kui te khang thu ai ke le ngai te tang thu chi khong ma ke the khang na ta na ai ke le swan tak ten la to ma amao be tang thu khong ke lo ma bang cha be tang thu cha ki gel zel ma mo hoi be tang thu khong chi dan de ki gel chianga kha i banga hoi pin illegitimate hi ka chi na hi mo legitimate lotel en I reimagine dan I pass I reimagine dan a hi mo himale colonial record te irit chianga kha colonial bias pen aware taka irit angai apoi mo dan ma kha indigenous record te le kha isim chianga kha the bias of essentialism ma or primitivism ichi here primordialism ichi here abi taka nationalism studies kha strength tom ma primordialism ichi kha sisana I na in nation omin chen hwai kha waya khang lui pe ka pana in nation hi chi hi dena hi chi te azo constructivism ai ke modernist argument aw ma wai kit post modernist argument no ke kha post modernist lam on te ka hi sima ma wai kha to hei primordialist account te isim chianga le what are the biases that we should be aware of ma what are the power relations that are at play uh, uh, what are the implications that these records have in actual empirical politics mo in politics taktako and in the way we see our history and our past ayai ani one te kha aware ma koma isima banga triangulation khat chi jen le colonial record te to aya te to it's a triangulation khat nei the dan khat kha banga academic tool set a om poimo chu hima mai ve chin kon gen bi kon dong khana dia ma
kon dong thang jwal de colonial record beyond colonial records ki pai thile chudan ka ya mo colonial records from ka babang kha thilo mabana mo social science wai bana ka comment dan khat chu eloiten james scott da banga wai book gel pen mo wai pen kha ki ha base ma mind in state formation apat ki tai khe chan de ya mo argument pia ke thi dana adik de ma lami hingte history khong bang khong isul le la akwa pe ma hi la pat ki pai in chin hi la pat plane ki pai su kya mo hatang pia ka chi jak chu biologically speaking in pai bang te le mi hing ten kha ma sa kha grains khong bang khong kha ai yai ai te khong yai an te khong rice te khong plantation dan thei chiang a kha plane pai suk dan dewa thei simenga domestication khong mo lekin an example gen le yai toy lak bang le yai zo gam lak to bang gen le tu ta dia bang lam ka a plane ki pai de wei chu ai to ki sai kha banga ei lam ten lai bu phong sim le aha sai to nang bangai dan ni hai james scott ta ken ngai chala khadei wi chu abul tunga chu on convincing ma accept thei ma mai le ngai to thak changa kwa pe ma chu gam la ka ke pain sin gam la ka pan mi hingon tam changa kha rice kong abang bang hon domestication kong animal kong bol hi changa plane ka pai su pin sin ki tam de do to bang example lam ka ya mo ei to ke sai kha bangai dan ne si
yai khamo umwan ka presentation a introduction la ka gen a hi ya mo banga recording om le ngai thak thei da hi le kon gen thak him dia slide number 4 to 5 bang en thak le hang hon pen sak thei wa le are Highlanders stateless or do Highlands kill states chỉ question ka donga mo hwa ya kha e kham tung mi te kha to nang no gen dan ma banga kha frontier mi ki hi chu that means i population to mo population large population kha kham tung ga min kha support zo lo chi chu and we are at the margin of the civilized or inhabited world mo left behind by civilization e chu why kha civilized youth le chu valley in ai sedentary chi dia tuilo i hon nei ngai hilele why banga why kha ahia mo himale frontier kha source of danger dana kimmo ekele ignorant of civilized order of social life ahikele a different type of society mo of lawlessness chi dana here himale slide number 5 zomia kha why pen a counter na dan a hi zo mo to nang na gen pen kha to kon argument gen pen zanga kha James Scott counter nei chu hile to kha James Scott in kha a argument a koi pen kha a why dominant argument om pen a counter na dia again a hi zo mo why kha zomia kha frontiersmen are not primitive out of ignorance hilawa a political choice wa hi state a yom cha tax forced labor slavery le mass destruction mo caused by wars and looting in chin why kha why teng a pata pot khat nang tai san na dia kha kham tung gam wa zwa nun chin mo tung cha kha friction of terrain zia ka kha chi mai ni why state mode of living pen kha thei lo win chin why pen kha atup mong wa mo hi chi chu deliberate primitivism chi ni atup mong wa ki chang kang lo sak chỉ đàn na gen le why kha ama argument chu ken kha to ka presentation a kon argue kha yai a dominant argument ti gel mo James Scott in ado te to frontier argument te hai ti gel kha banga a dualistic dana koinga ken kha a hai ti gel te ka koma kha alternate framework chi dia thei diam chi dop na to khai cha presentation kon bo chi dan deu chui ve
No, cái
thank you
cái
eh
này thật
eh,
cần
le
interesting mà đó à
Mhm.
cái gần đợt nộp trên này cái game của thế này và cái này mua đa nhiều chỗ na methodology na giật cái contextual analysis làm cái đi đều in tâm hòa mà và ngoài ba na và context sociology cái anthropology làm humanities social science làm và năng năng study lam tapi sai kita le hai lam deuh focus te methodology as a teo ma wai te hong banga non share te ale nang na hi dan tung to ni nga adam zo ka scholars ngen hi di dan tamwa ai pen ka nang bang methodology ko nga na sang security dan de ai pen man
methodology dana question na ki dot cha kha hak sama ma da ya hiang wa I ko yang gel kan le kon en swal a method to kha atang pe kha en kha kai approach dan kha hi chi hiang mo I intellectual tradition ichi pe kha contextless hi thei lo hi mo contextual contextual genealogy nei gi ge hi for example to a state pen kon deconstruct dan bang en le hang state kha Aristotle le Plato in hwaya the republic khong isi ma le hwaya pata khai cha intellectual tradition kha zuya kha western scholar ten kha to hopstick hoin kha I banga the 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 sovereign the leviathan achi khong bang mo pai khong pata kha state concept hi cha hong pai in chin waya atopa kha by popular agreement type of westphalian concept of state hong me chu hoi kha khovel pumpia academic discourse ha western hon dominate changa hiai intellectual tradition of what makes a state mo pen kha khovel pumpia hon ke apply hi tai chu himale ahon ki pat khia dan kha very particular context e chu waya Greek copy khata pata hong ki pani chu nidang la ya mo hele himale he kha mun tenga hon applicable non ta lo chu India a kha Chanakya ichi Kautilya ichi a banga the Indian Machiavelli kichi si na ya wain kha ama hun la ya mandala concept hon bolin jin wai mandala concept kha to Westphalian concept of state ton ki bang non het lo we chu of course tu modern state pena critique chu tampi oma hiya edan tampi oma himale modern state lo traditional state chini a a aki conceptualize dan enle hang i aman kha i banga intellectual tradition dang kha thong zu ya hwai kha to sj tambia te khoin kha hwai intellectual tradition pen hon pick up un chin a yai Westphalian ai kile mainstream intellectual tradition to kha hong te ka kun chin aki pat na le ki pat lo na te hong en un chin hu cha kha Southeast Asia context a hong en wi chu hon apply yu chini himale West European context hong ale applicable na tama tam zel mai the hi ki apply ki chi thua hi himale apply di bang hi le mandala model jang ina hoya England kumpi gam te khong ai ke le Spain te khong endi hi le applicable ma na chang om mai the hi azo Westphalian concept bang dominant loina mandala concept bang ana dominant hi le kha hoya England te khong ai ke le Spain te khong kha hoi concept janga kha ki study da di chu hoi kha intellectual or knowledge production na he a politics om pen khong kilang sa ka ya mo hoi kha ken ka hi chu to kon gen dan ma banga concept om a conceptual genealogy chi mai ni bang tan hiam ma su jek in bang context a na ki jang kha le a context danga apply di hi le bang chi tu ben applicable a chi dan de mo hoi ti kang na comparative lens khat hoi khat kha zat ngain kamu kan chi di again tamai mai le hai kha andre bete te khongin le ai ki le elementary universe te khongin le comparative method cha ana gen ma wa hi mo comparative methodology ichi ya a hwai line of thinking zanga kha to a context a chi mai ni kon apply dan de chui ve
ole tipake
adang om lai dio om lai le khat i alas na di na mo khat khong i ngak lai dia wai kha alas na di dan ni ko idea om lai jen jen khak le i hun kha yun sots dexim ta wai wana i zoom le kha timing bang tanya ma i limit ki ko hi na alas na di dan in khat i ngak dia om ma le ma om tuan lo di ma le e tuan lo hi ale e tuna azon lam ma i lu tawa e tunia e topic ki kha interesting ma e ken le thebe tampi ka na nia e ke field to ki ki zoi ton ke specialty hi ke ma le to na ina e cha banga han dissect and simple taka and explain ha e nom taka angai kheten le ki learn thei manina ma tunga ki pa thui gen thak taka wai pana e tunian tel te kha i i tel tung ina mi som lenga ya mi phawa wai bana wai zoina mi som ni laka lakina i pung to wa wai teng kha kiam to den ma he cha apot khia chi leom to lo na china e na ngai khe ve kwa interesting ma mai hi lam hoi in le e on lang saka hoi cha ki pa thu kon gena tunia tel thei te teng teng tunga le acha i speaker pa tunga le amana i banga thil wind up na di dan ei ke thil again no pom lai le khat ve chan si pe lai da wai bana uh, abana chu i a closing remark dan ina aman len bol nga le ma uchi dan na i zo dia le
as tu tu tung be kho sa pang lo di ka ki chi sim chu ya himale akipa hwaya khamasa akine akine khatenga monthly study circle na akine segri pen khamasa akine theology akin organizer lamte chini hoya patina ngai tam kon ngien na sa hidia hoi loina e working papers lampang lekha push ball uti hiwa mo study circle hi na kha very unofficial very informal cha ki present to adin working paper to kya le ready nai ma lo hi ya loophole tam pi ke ma mai le kar gu na ka the o ma himale hi cha I present kya ta hi cha no apa na comment ka mu ti khong ki ya ke hon bol la hi ya mo academic ta ka ke hon bol la hi waida na kha I ama akha ni danga PhD ana zo sa te kong ikili I professor te kong I samse kwa hoi tele chuma bana I samsel tho de himale ma bana kha I banga no khong bang chini to hi mu na om kem pe no khong bang le presentation pe di khong ai on ki ngien khamai the hi ya on ki nget kha ka le aki chu first year second year cho hi pan la e ken PhD zo nai le chi tuan lo ina I no research area pata lung lu thoi na sak deu khong bang ma le hoi present di dan ko ki sak khiat ngam na ma hoi non ne yu kon ngien a hi dia china I akhit na kon bol dia next month last Saturday chang nai ki mu vek non diu on le lung khem pe da me ki pak lo ai